Every day we're faced with risk. How we control and manage that risk can result in varying outcomes. These outcomes have the potential to affect both ourselves and also others. In the workplace, there are a number of activities that involve elevated risk due to the potential outcomes if something should go wrong. Several examples include lifting with cranes, working at heights, scaffolding, dropped objects, and working in confined spaces. We have tools to control and manage these risks, such as risk assessments, lift studies, barricading, and signage, just to mention a few. The purpose of these tools are to assist with the identification of hazards and having controls in place to either eliminate or reduce the possibility of an unwanted event, such as an injury to ourselves or to others. The saying, plan your work, work your plan, is critical in the management of these underlying risks and the tools associated with their control. But what happens when something changes that you haven't planned for? For example, completing a complex lift which is controlled by a lift study and a sudden front comes across, or your lift controller becomes unwell and you need a substitute. Undertaking trenching work to find out there are unidentified surfaces in the area you're excavating. Something as simple as not having enough scaffold clips. Or just working out in the open environment and finding there's an unexpected change in weather conditions. If we don't assess and adapt a whole way through, implementing a continuous process of change management, the effects of work-related accidents can be devastating. Loss of income, lengthy rehabilitation, and in some cases, loss of life. Now we're going to examine a serious accident to illustrate the outcomes of who else will this affect.
Hello, my name's Cole Johnson. I'm the lifting superintendent on the Jimblebar project, and today I want to talk about an accident that occurred in October 2000 at Laverick Barracks, North Queensland in Townsville. What the job was building accommodation units for the Army. There was a lot of them. The structures comprised of vertical walls that were 20 tonne in weight and 10 tonne floors, and there was prefabricated galvanised walls that went in the front and the back of these units on the middle floor and the top floor. In between the structure and the next unit, there was a prefabricated galvanised wall that went in there with 4 heavy-set bolts that went into precast ferrules in the concrete. These tied one unit into the next unit. The crew that they had there, they had a large crawler crane. They had a crew of 3 to 4 riggers, and their job was to erect these panels and do all the works that came with it. Now, due to contractual and time frames on the project, it was decided that they would introduce a second crew, and the second crew would come through, and their job was to put all these prefabricated galvanised walls in the structures and also do any other associated work. So the crane crew's job was only to erect panels. So as they went into the task the next day, everything started out okay, but the crane crew could actually erect the structures quicker than what the backup crew could put in the galvanised wall sets on the front and back of the units. So the crane crew actually ended up one full structure ahead of the backup crew. So what happened then is they got to the end of that first structure. They were 4 units ahead, and then they wanted to go on and start another structure. Now, there was a shortage of blocks and props on the job, so it was decided that we would go back to the end of the structure and remove the prop and the block off the end of the structure and take it up to the new structures and start erecting buildings again. So one of the riggers, Nick, got into the EWP, he positioned himself out on the road, and then he tallied the EWP into the first prop, which was the one closest to the road, attached the crane to it, undone the bolt on the wall, undone the bolt on the concrete block, removed the prop and put it on the ground. He then extended the EWP out to get the second prop, attached the crane to it, same deal, removed the bolt from the block, lifted it up, placed it onto the ground. Why he was retracting the EWP out of the structure, the two vertical walls and the two floors, that whole structure just started to go sideways. And it didn't make a lot of noise, so he didn't hear anything coming, but the full weight of that structure, there was 60 tonne of concrete that come down that day. It actually struck the EWP. Nick had a harness on, but it threw Nick out of the basket, and while he was thrown out of the basket, one of the panels coming down from the thing struck Nick in the stomach and gave him a very serious stomach injury. When the dust cleared, the crane crew ran down to Nick's assistance, obviously to offer him first aid and to see what they could do to help. When they got there, they could see Nick was in a serious way. He had a serious stomach injury. They applied pressure to stop the bleeding there. There was mouth-to-mouth given. The crane driver ran down to the scene. He was assuring Nick that help was on its way, an ambulance had been called, and to hang in there. Now, I know how that crane driver felt that day because that crane driver was me. I was the one sitting beside Nick, telling him that help was going to come, and I looked at Nick and I looked in his eyes, and it was like someone had pulled out the PowerPoint. His pupils just started to shrink, and it soon became pretty clear to me that Nick had passed away. Well, the feeling that I had that day was probably the worst feeling that I've ever had, and I hope I never ever have it again, because I can't describe the pain that we were in. All the crane crew was in shock. We didn't know what to do. The ambulance came. They actually removed Nick from the accident scene. He was taken away. And it was at that point that I started to think about Nick's fiancée, Vanessa. I would have an obligation to go down and see Vanessa, and she would expect me to come to explain to her what happened. And the reason behind that is a couple of weeks prior to this, Nick had asked me if I'd be best man at his wedding. So I made my way down to the flat. I knew that other people would be in that flat when I got there, and I remember walking through the front door of that flat and looking at Vanessa, and the look that she gave me, I'll never forget it. It was this look of despair and virtually begging for me to tell her that it wasn't true. And I had to tell Vanessa that it was true, that Nick had passed away on the job. And we often say, who else will this affect? Well, that particular day, Vanessa lost her partner. They could have had kids together, they would have had fun together, they would have grown old together. She was robbed of that. Nick had 2 young children to a previous relationship. They were only very young at the time. Nick won't be there to see them play junior football, and he won't be there for their 18th birthday. He won't be there for their 21st. He won't be there when they get married and when they have children. He won't enjoy the grandchildren. Myself, I lost a best mate that day, and I went from being best man at his wedding to carrying his photo down the aisle at his funeral. The shock to my system that day, I ended up with a severe case of psoriasis. I went to the Skin and Cancer Clinic, and they said, if you have a shock to the nervous system, it can trigger this off. So I'm reminded every single day of what happened in October 2000. Out there on the project, we had good systems in place. We had a good JHA. We had a very good methodology, we had a good lift study, but there'd been change introduced onto the job, and the change was that we didn't identify the risks and we didn't manage the hazards. And as a result, it went straight through to a fatality. And we lost Nick that day as a result of that. When we're out working on the field, one of the biggest risks out there in the construction field is change. If we have a planned activity and something happens where we have a change, we need to stop, wait, take 5, step back and have a look. Identify the risks, identify the hazards. I said when Nick was killed that day that somewhere up the road I would do something and not let him just become another statistic. I didn't want him to be another number on a board of another person that had been killed on a construction site. And I'm here today, and hopefully what we're doing here will give something back that'll avert the same sort of pain that we experienced that day in October, so it can't happen again. For myself, this is closure for today for this, and we'll be moving forward. And we talk about life, life's precious, and you only get one go at it. So take care of yourselves when you're out there in the field, and just take care.
On average, in Western Australia, a person is fatally injured in the workplace every 18 days.